Okay, so let's talk through a couple of the different types of problems that you're going to see where you have to find the equation of the line. The first one is one where you're going to be asked to write the equation based on the graph. Okay, so this one is the whole point, or the whole strategy of writing your equation for the line is going to be to use y equals mx plus b. Okay, and what you're going to do is you're going to have to either calculate or count the slope first. Okay, so the first thing is to find the slope. And then the second thing would be to plug in a known point. So with an x coordinate and a known y coordinate, and the slope that you just found or calculated, and plug that into this equation and solve for b. Okay, so when you perform that second step, you would be plugging in your x and your y. And these are the three different ways that you're going to be asked to do those things, right? Or three of the ways. And so the first one is just to interpret the points based on a graph. And now, if this graph had a clear y-intercept with no question about what it is, the easiest way to do it would just be to count the slope and then count your, or identify your y-intercept. Okay, but that's going to be a little bit, it's not necessarily clear what that y-intercept is here. So what you need to do is you need to perform step one, find the slope. And so the easiest way to do that is to go ahead and count it. So if I count the slope here, I go up 3, and I go over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the positive direction. So I see that my slope in this case is 3 over 5. Okay, so I know my m value. That's the first step. Then my second step is to plug in a known x, a known y, and the slope that you just found. So I have my m value already substituted. And what I can do is I can plug in a value for my x and my y based on these points that I see on my sketch. Okay, and it doesn't matter which set of points you use. So let's say I choose this point right here. At this point, what's the x coordinate? 1. And what's the y coordinate? Up 2. Okay, so I plug in a 1 for x and a 2 for y. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to solve for b. Okay. When I perform the operations to this, I would work with the fraction first. Okay, so 3/5 times 1 is just 3/5. And the reason I would work with that first is I would put my number on the left side in terms of that same fraction. So since I have fifths over here, 2 is how many fifths? Okay, 10/5 is equivalent to 2. So if I rewrite it in terms of that same fraction, it just makes it easier for this final step when I subtract 3/5 to isolate my variable completely. I wind up with here 10 minus 3, which is 7 over 5. So here's my b value. So I found the two things that I needed to write my equation of this line. I found my slope and I found my b value, my y-intercept. And so the final step is you're going to rewrite the y equals mx plus b and replace the m and the b. Okay, so I know my m is 3/5, so my equation is y equals 3/5 x plus my b value was 7/5, and so that would be my final answer. Okay. All right, I'm going to talk through this first problem here. Okay, step one is to find the slope. So I have my 2 points. My slope is calculated by taking the difference of my y. So I'm going to start with the 14 minus a negative 11 divided by the difference of my x's. Now, whatever y I start with, I have to start with that corresponding x. So it didn't matter which one I chose, as long as I choose the correct, or the corresponding x as well. So negative 2 minus 0. Minus and minus becomes a plus. So I'm left with a 25 over negative 2. So negative 25 halves is going to be my slope. Okay, once I find my slope, I then need to find my y-intercept. Now, remember my y-intercept is the value of y when x is 0. Well, what do I notice in this order pair here? They already give me when x is 0, y is negative 11. So I can find my y-intercept just by looking at that point. Again, that's not always going to happen, but if you do have an order pair where your x-coordinate is 0, you can use that as your y-intercept. Therefore, we get our equation, y equals m, negative 25 halves x, plus b, which is negative 11, and that would be your equation.